Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining the Bay Area Air Quality Management District's Funding for the TRUs Now and in the Future webinar. My name is Cynthia, and I'll be the Assistant Staff Specialist supporting the Air District's grants program. Today, I'll be assisting the presentation. Today, we'll have the presenter from our on-road manager, Minda Babacco, and then supported by Daniel Anderson, who is a special staff specialist in our off-road team. Now we will go over some housekeeping items and how to participate in today's webinar. Next slide, please. Today's webinar is being recorded. You can find a copy of today's presentation and additional resources for you to download on our website. The webinar's recording will be posted on our website by next week. You can also email us at grants@baaqmd.gov for copies as well. You are listening in using your computer speaker by default. If you would prefer to join over the phone, select the up arrow to the right of your microphone button, which will pop up a menu. Select switch to phone option and enter into the dialing information in your invite email to join by phone. Please be aware that you will not be able to unmute, use your video, or share your screen during today's presentation. We will not be taking the questions live. Please use the chat function at the bottom of your Zoom window to submit your question to please send me your questions, Cynthia, during the presentation. Anytime is fine. Next, I will pass this on to our on-road manager, Minda. Hi, Minda.
Hi, welcome everyone. I'm going to just give an outline and then I'll be passing this over to my colleague, Danny Anderson. So today we're going to be giving a brief outline, background on the Air District. We're going to talk about funding that's available for TRUs now. That includes eligibility and funding available. Then we'll discuss what we're considering opening in the spring, which is goods movement funding for TRUs, and what the eligibility and funding available would look like for that. And then there'll be an opportunity for questions and to share feedback. So most likely questions on the current open solicitation, and then feedback or comments on what we're considering for the future in the spring. This is an alert before we get started. This is a webinar only about funding for electric and hydrogen transport refrigeration units and supporting charging infrastructure, and only for commercially available products. So if you have an interest in something else, that's great. And we encourage you to get in touch with our staff, but that is not this webinar. And with that, I'm going to pass this over to Danny.
Thanks, Minda, and good afternoon. My name is Danny, and I'm a grant specialist at the Air District. The Air District is a regional agency for the Bay Area, which covers the entirety of 7 Bay Area counties and about half of Solano and Sonoma counties. The Air District's mission is to ensure a healthy breathing environment, and to do so with a mix of tools, which includes a scientific air monitoring network and writing and enforcing rules for stationary sources of pollution. In addition, the Air District provides grants to reduce emissions from mobile sources of air pollution and fund technologies and projects with the greatest potential to reduce air pollutants, as well as greenhouse gases, through replacing and upgrading equipment and vehicles of different kinds. In recent years, the Air District shifted its focus to prioritize collaboration with communities disproportionately impacted by air pollution. The input we get from these communities informs our outreach and the types of projects we fund. Next slide, please. Here's a map showing some of the areas the Air District has identified as priority areas for grant funding. We are targeting our funding towards projects operating in the Air District's most impacted communities. These priority areas are deemed low income and disadvantaged by the state Cal Virus Screen initiative. They are shown here in blue, yellow, and green. These priority areas also include the AB 617 communities of West Oakland, East Oakland, Richmond, San Pablo, and Bayview Hunters Point, Southeast San Francisco. Next slide, please. Your funding application must include a geographic eligibility form. We encourage you to complete this form prior to starting your application because it will help you determine whether you are operating in an area being funded in the current solicitation period. This form can be found on the Air District's Funding and Incentives webpage. Next slide, please. During this application period, a total of $90 million is available for grant funding. $75 million is allocated for projects in priority areas and AB 6117 communities. $10 million is available for agricultural equipment that operates anywhere in the Air District boundaries, and $5 million is available for locomotive projects. Like previous solicitations, this one will operate on a first-come, first-served basis, and the deadline to submit your application is February 6th, 2025 at 5 p.m. Next slide, please. Let's continue with some Moyer funding eligibility basics. The existing equipment must have an engine rating that is greater than or equal to 25 horsepower. Moyer grant funding is available for the refrigeration unit only. Examples included here on the slide are the box truck mounted and trailer mounted TRUs. Funding is available for infrastructure as an add-on to support zero-emission equipment purchased through this program. Examples include electric charging stations to charge electric equipment and hydrogen fuel cell system technology. Standalone infrastructure projects not linked to specific equipment are not currently eligible for funding. Only zero-emission replacements are eligible. No hybrid or backup fueling options are eligible for funding. Again, the deadline to submit your application is February 6, 2025 at 5 p.m. And please note that equipment must operate or be domiciled in a disadvantaged, low-income, or AB 617 community. Next slide. Here are some additional Moyer funding eligibility basics. Scrap and replace funding is available for the refrigeration unit only, not the trailer or truck. For Moyer funding, only the TRU itself is eligible. A project may repower, convert, or replace the TRU to zero-emission technology only. The existing equipment must be operational and have a functional hour meter. You must also provide records that demonstrate that you have used the equipment in the Bay Area for 2 years or more. And you must have owned and operated the equipment in the Bay Area at least 75% of the time. Please note, the percentage that you operate in the Bay Area will be applied to your determined award. Regulatory compliance is also an important eligibility requirement. Fleets and equipment cannot have any outstanding violations and must be in full compliance with all applicable regulations and registered with CARB to receive funding. Funding cannot be used to bring equipment into compliance, and funded equipment cannot be used towards compliance requirements while under contract. The most common regulations that TRU equipment may be subject to are the Airborne Toxic Control Measure for TRUs and the statewide truck and bus regulation. Please note, it is very important that you do not make any purchases or down payments on any piece of equipment before the contract is signed by all parties, as this would deem a project ineligible. Next slide, please. The maximum percentage of funding for eligible costs for both TRU repowers and replacements is 50%. Please note, the project may receive awards up to the maximum percentage of eligible costs. The final calculated award will depend on the existing equipment, engine tier, usage, engineer, and horsepower. The reimbursement rate for associated infrastructure is up to 50%. However, if the project also includes solar and wind power systems, then the reimbursement rate is up to 65%. Additional funding may be available with the CORE program. If you are applying for Air District funding and pursuing additional funding, please note this in your application. The costs that can be reimbursed are listed here. The base cost of replacing or repowering the refrigeration unit only. As mentioned under Moyer, there is no funding for the refrigeration trailer component. We cannot reimburse for premium additions, extended warranties, docking fees, or other optional items. We can reimburse for a percentage of sales tax and freight charges towards eligible equipment costs. As previously mentioned, infrastructure funding is also available. This funding is available for installations of non-residential battery charging, and other types of infrastructure could be approved on a case-by-case basis. Funding can reimburse a range of costs as listed here, from initial design and engineering to equipment purchase and installation, to shipping charges and taxes. Next slide, please. Here's a screenshot of the Carl Moyer Grant Program website to give you an idea of what it looks like. To begin your application, click on the Apply Now box shown here to the left in the teal highlighted area. The Apply Now button will take you to the application portal shown here on the right, where you can log in if you already have an account or create an account if you are a new user. That's all for me. I will now pass it back over to Minda to go over the upcoming goods movement funding for TRUs. Thank you.
Thanks, Danny. I'm going to leave my video off for now, just so people can focus a little bit on the screen, the presentation. So this is a solicitation that we're considering. So Danny was talking about what's open right now, what's available. It's pretty much set in stone. This is something that we're considering for the spring. So we're open to comments and feedback and sharing your thoughts on what we're proposing. At the end, when we're answering questions and accepting comments, it'll be important that you share with us which item that you're referencing, so it's not confusing. So this is what we're considering for TRUs. Eligible equipment to be replaced would be existing diesel trailer TRUs, so not truck TRUs. And they would have to be TRUs that are used to move goods the majority of the time, and that they've been used consistently over the past 2 years. The geographic restrictions for this program would be different from the Moyer in that they would have to operate at least 10% of the time within the Bay Area's district's trade corridor. And installation of TRU plugs would have to be within the air district. And the TRUs must be dismantled and inspected within the air district as well. And as I mentioned before, it has to travel within the trade corridors. Oops, too far. So the equipment owner for this program must demonstrate 100% compliant carrier status with ARB's equipment registration, so ARBOR system, and not have any violations with CARB or the Air District. Demonstrate proof of equipment warranty on the program funded equipment. Commit to a project life of 5 years or 10,000 hours, whichever comes first. Be willing to scrap the old diesel TRU and retain documentation for 2 years after the end of the equipment project term, or 3 years after final payment, whichever is later. And of course, be willing to purchase a zero emission replacement. This is the funding that we're looking at right now. So the lower of 80% or $50,000 to replace with an all-electric or fuel cell zero-emission transport refrigerator. And for the electric plugs, it would be 50% or $30,000 to install 10 electric plugs that are compatible with the TRUs. And then additional power plugs could be funded at the lower of either 50% of the cost or $3,000 per additional plug. And the costs that are eligible are for the TRU and for the electric power plugs, with a minimum, of course, of 1. The co-funding is a little bit different for the goods movement program. Not able to fund with Moyer, which is what Danny's talking about. So very different funding sources. Can match funding from greenhouse gas reduction incentives, including AB 118 and the LCTP program, and potentially also with CORE. So additional information for what Danny was talking about is available on our website, and to apply online also is there. And for more information about goods movement, that's going to be coming soon. We'll bring the slide up again at the end. So now is an opportunity for folks to share questions and feedback, and Cynthia shared earlier how to do so by putting them into the chat. When you do so, please state your name and your affiliation and which program you're commenting on, what's open now, which is Moyer, or what we're considering for this spring, which would be goods movement. And we're gonna just take a 5-minute pause, probably less than that, just to let questions come in. And then we'll come back and start answering.